Step into a shadowed dungeon in the heart of medieval Europe, the year 1450, where the air is thick with the stench of damp stone, rust, and the metallic tang of fear. Chains clank faintly in the gloom, and a flickering torch casts eerie shadows on an array of instruments, metal spikes, wooden frames, and cruel devices crafted to inflict pain beyond the limits of human endurance. This is the world of medieval torture devices, tools of agony that turned justice into a theater of suffering, where screams were the currency of power. But which of these brutal inventions caused the most unbearable torment, which left victims shattered in body and soul, their cries echoing through the dark history of the Middle Ages? Today, we're embarking on a chilling journey to rank the most brutal medieval torture devices by the pain they inflicted, weaving together their mechanics, the stories of those who endured them, and the haunting mysteries that cling to their legacy. From the rack's merciless stretch to the breaking wheel's bone-crushing blows, this brutal ranking will plunge you into the dark history of torture, where cruelty was an art and pain a language of control. Whether you're driving through the night, working at your desk, or craving a tale that seizes your soul, settle in. Let's explore the medieval torture devices that haunt the shadows of history, a descent into the abyss of human suffering. The Middle Ages, from the 12th to the 16th centuries, were a crucible of feudal power, religious fervor, and relentless turmoil. Torture was not merely punishment, it was a calculated tool of medieval justice, wielded by kings, lords, and the church to extract confessions, punish crimes, or silence rebellion. Medieval torture devices were engineered with grim precision, each designed to maximize pain while serving a purpose: interrogation, public deterrence, or divine retribution. Texts like the Malleus Maleficarum, 1486, a guide to witch hunting, and chronicles like those of Jean Froissart paint a world where pain was a public spectacle, spoken through devices like the thumbscrew, pair of anguish, strappado, Judas cradle, iron maiden, rack, breaking wheel, and lesser-known tools like the scold's bridle or heretic's fork. Ranking these by pain is a grim task, as each inflicted unique horrors, targeting body and mind in ways that left lasting scars. By examining their mechanics, historical accounts, psychological impact, and cultural legacy, we'll construct a brutal ranking that unveils the dark history of medieval torture devices. This is a journey into the shadows of medieval Europe, where suffering was a stage and cruelty a testament to power. Let's begin with the thumbscrew, a small but vicious device, ranking lowest in our brutal ranking due to its localized pain, yet still a terror in its precision. Picture a dungeon in Trier, Germany, 1580, where a suspected heretic's thumbs are clamped in iron screws, tightened by hand until bones splinter and flesh tears. The Malleus Maleficarum describes thumbscrews as a staple for extracting confessions, their portability ideal for cramped cells or courtrooms. The pain was intense, crushed bones, screaming nerves but confined to the hands, allowing interrogators to prolong suffering without risking immediate death. The psychological toll was profound. Victims, often tortured before witnesses, faced humiliation as their screams echoed, a warning to others. Trial records from the Spanish Inquisition and English witch hunts note its use on heretics and witches. The screws turned slowly to maximize dread. The thumbscrew's simplicity, two metal plates and a screw, belied its cruelty, with victims left unable to use their hands, their pain a constant reminder of their fate. While not the most brutal, its precision and psychological impact earn it a place in our brutal ranking, a sharp note in the dark history of medieval torture devices. Next, let's explore the scold's bridle, a device used primarily on women accused of gossip or witchcraft, ranking slightly higher for its blend of physical and social torment. Imagine a village in Essex, England, 1590, where a woman accused of slandering neighbors is fitted with an iron muzzle, its spiked tongue pressing into her mouth to silence her. The News from Scotland pamphlet describes the bridle, used to curb scolding or suspected spellcasting, its spikes causing pain and bleeding with any attempt to speak. Paraded through the streets, the victim faced public humiliation, with crowds jeering as the bridle bit into her tongue. The pain was moderate cuts and bruising, but the psychological impact was severe, silencing women in a society that already marginalized them. The bridle's use, documented in Scottish and English trials, targeted the voice, a symbolic attack on agency, making it a cruel tool of control. Its combination of physical pain and public shame places it above the thumbscrew in our brutal ranking, a chilling relic in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The heretic's fork ranks next, a device of precise agony used on those accused of blasphemy or heresy. Picture a dungeon in Seville, 1490, where a prisoner's neck is strapped with a double-pronged fork, one end piercing under the chin, the other against the chest, forcing them to keep their head upright or risk impalement. Inquisition records describe the fork's use, often during interrogations, its prongs digging into flesh if the victim's head drooped from exhaustion. The pain was sharp but localized, with blood trickling as the prongs pierced skin. Yet its true horror was psychological. Victims, unable to rest or sleep, faced constant dread of worsening the wounds. The fork's design ensured prolonged suffering, with interrogators demanding confessions while the victim struggled to stay upright. Used in Spain and Italy, particularly during the Inquisition, the heretic's fork combined physical torment with mental strain, earning a higher spot in our brutal ranking, a grim symbol in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The pair of anguish, shrouded in myth but undeniably cruel, ranks higher for its intimate and invasive pain. Imagine a cell in Paris, 1475, where an accused blasphemer faces a pear-shaped metal device inserted into their mouth. A screw is turned, and the pear's leaves expand, stretching or tearing tissue with excruciating precision. The Directorium Inquisitorum by Nicholas Eimerich mentions such devices for crimes like blasphemy or sodomy, targeting orifices to maximize shame and pain. The physical agony, torn flesh, broken jaws, was compounded by the psychological horror of invasion, often in front of guards or priests. While 19th century accounts, like those of Johann Siebenke's, exaggerate its prevalence, some medieval records suggest limited use in France and Spain. The pear's targeted cruelty, attacking speech or sexuality, and its humiliating public application place it above the fork in our brutal ranking, a haunting relic in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The strappado, widely used across Europe, ranks higher still for its relentless torment. Picture a dungeon in Florence, 1450, where a suspected traitor is hoisted by their arms, tied behind their back, and suspended from a ceiling beam. Heavy weight stones or iron are tied to their feet, pulling until shoulders dislocate with a sickening pop. The Historia Florentina by Machiavelli describes the strappado's use in interrogations, its pain-forcing confessions from heretics, witches, or rebels. Interrogators could drop or hoist the victim, each movement amplifying agony, with torn muscles and dislocated joints leaving lasting damage. The anticipation of each drop was a psychological weapon, breaking wills before bodies. Court records from Venice to Scotland document its use. Often in view of other prisoners, it screams a warning. The strappado's combination of physical destruction and mental dread earns it a high spot in our brutal ranking, a cornerstone of the dark history of medieval torture devices. The Judas cradle, a device of excruciating precision, ranks even higher for its invasive cruelty. Imagine a dungeon in Toledo, 1500, where an accused which is lowered onto a pointed, pyramid-shaped seat, their weight pressing the tip into their body. Inquisition records describe the Judas cradle, used for witchcraft or sexual sins, its slow, penetrating pain-forcing confessions. The victim was hoisted and dropped repeatedly, the point tearing flesh and causing infections, often leading to death. The psychological horror being impaled before interrogators or clergy was devastating, with shame amplifying physical agony. The device's design required minimal effort, letting gravity inflict pain, yet its effects were unrelenting, targeting sensitive areas. Its rarity in records suggests limited use, but its sheer brutality combining invasive pain with prolonged suffering places it near the top of our brutal ranking, a horrifying chapter in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The Iron Maiden, often linked to medieval torture but likely a myth, ranks lower than expected due to its questionable historical use. Picture a spiked, coffin-like device in Nuremberg, 1600, its doors closing to pierce the victim. While 19th century museum displays popularized the Iron Maiden, medieval records, like the Nuremberg Chronicles, lack evidence of its use in trials or executions. Its psychological terror, being enclosed in a spiked tomb, was potent, but its pain, if used, would have been quick and fatal, limiting interrogation value. Historians like Wolfgang Schild argue it was a Victorian exaggeration, yet its cultural impact as a symbol of medieval cruelty earns it a place in our brutal ranking. Its mythic status adds intrigue to the dark history of medieval torture devices, blending fact and fiction in a chilling narrative. The rack, one of the most infamous devices, ranks near the pinnacle for its unrelenting agony. Picture a dungeon in the Tower of London, 1450, where a suspected traitor is strapped to a wooden frame, wrists and ankles bound by ropes tied to pulleys. The executioner turns a crank, stretching the body until joints pop, muscles tear, and vertebrae crack. John Fox's Book of Martyrs describes the rack's use during religious purges, its pain-forcing confessions from heretics or rebels. The device allowed precise control, with interrogators pausing to question or prolong suffering over hours or days. The physical toll, dislocated limbs, torn ligaments, crushed spines, was matched by the psychological dread of hearing the cranks creak, knowing more pain was coming. Used across Europe, from England to Spain, the rack's versatility and excruciating agony place it high in our brutal ranking, a cornerstone of the dark history of medieval torture devices. The breaking wheel, reserved for the worst crimes, claims the top spot in our brutal ranking for its bone-shattering, prolonged horror. Imagine a public square in Bavaria, 1430, where a murderer is bound to a large wooden wheel, its spokes threaded with ropes to splay their limbs. The executioner, wielding a heavy iron bar, delivers crushing blows, shattering bones one by one, the cracks echoing through the crowd. The Nuremberg Chronicles describe the wheel as a most cruel punishment, its public display ensuring maximum deterrence. The victim, often left alive on the wheel for days, suffered unimaginable pain, their broken body exposed to the elements, insects, and birds. The psychological impact, knowing each blow could be the last, yet death lingered, was devastating, with crowds amplifying the horror through cheers, jeers, or stunned silence. The breaking wheel's methodical brutality, combining physical destruction with prolonged suffering, makes it the most brutal of medieval torture devices, a grim pinnacle in the dark history of torture. Let's dive into a story that brings the breaking wheel's horror to life. In 1415, during the Hussite Wars in Prague, a rebel priest named Jan Zalewski was sentenced to the breaking wheel for inciting rebellion against the church. The Chronic in Bohemia paints the scene. Thousands packed Old Town Square, their cheers fading to silence as the executioner shattered Jan's limbs, each blow drawing gasps from the crowd. But the next morning, the wheel was overturned, Jan's body gone, and cryptic symbols a cross and a flame carved into the scaffold's wood. Did his followers steal his body to honor him as a martyr, risking death themselves? Or did the authorities remove it to prevent a shrine forming, fearing his influence? Locals swore the square was haunted, with cries echoing at night and bloodstains reappearing on the cobblestones, no matter how often they were scrubbed. This mystery, tied to the breaking wheel's brutality, shows how medieval torture devices could spark legends that outlived their victims, a chilling thread in the dark history of medieval Europe. The rack's terror is captured in another tale, this one from 1477 in England, during the Wars of the Roses. A Yorkist spy named William Blackthorne was accused of treason and tortured on the rack in the Tower of London. The Rolls series record his screams as the crank turned, stretching his body until joints snapped and muscles tore. But one night, the rack was found broken, its ropes severed, and William gone, leaving only a bloodied cloak behind. Did his allies infiltrate the tower's dungeons, risking their lives to free him? Or was his disappearance a royal cover-up to hide a failed interrogation? Locals claimed the tower was haunted, with ghostly cries echoing near the rack's chamber, the clank of chains heard at midnight. This mystery, rooted in the rack's agonizing stretch, underscores its high rank in our brutal ranking, a testament to the dark history of medieval torture devices. The pair of anguish features in a chilling story from 1490 in Seville, during the Spanish Inquisition. A woman named Maria de la Cruz, accused of witchcraft, faced the pear in her mouth, its leaves expanding to tear her flesh as interrogators demanded confessions. Inquisition records note her screams, but the next morning, the dungeon was empty, the pear's leaves broken, and a glowing candle left burning on the floor. Was this a miracle, suggesting her innocence, or a daring rescue by sympathizers defying the church? Locals whispered of a ghostly figure in Seville's alleys, her mouth bleeding yet speaking truths the Inquisition feared. This mystery, tied to the pair of anguish's intimate cruelty, cements its place in our brutal ranking, a painful relic in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The Strapado's horror is vivid in a tale from 1610 in Lograno, Spain, during the Basque witch trials. A healer named Maria de Arburu was accused of cursing livestock and tortured with the Strapado in an Inquisition dungeon. Records describe her shoulders dislocating as she was hoisted, her screams filling the cell, yet she refused to name accomplices. The next morning, the dungeon was silent, Maria gone, and a single candle left burning, its flame untouched by the damp. Was this a village rescue, risking death to save their healer, or a divine sign of her innocence? Locals claimed the dungeon dripped with water, echoing Maria's prayers at night. This mystery, rooted in the Strapado's relentless torment, reinforces its high rank in our brutal ranking, a grim chapter in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The Judas cradle's cruelty shines in a story from 1627 in Würzburg, Germany, during the height of the witch hunts. A baker named Clara Weiss was accused of poisoning bread with magic and lowered onto the Judas cradle's pointed seat. Trial records describe her agony as the point pierced her flesh, her screams echoing before a crowd of interrogators. But the next morning, the cradle was empty, its point bent as if by unnatural force, and a loaf of bread left untouched on the dungeon floor. Did her neighbors, fearing a cursed harvest, stage a rescue? Or was her body removed to prevent her becoming a martyr? Locals claimed the dungeon glowed at night, the scent of fresh bread lingering in the air, a haunting reminder of Clara's trade. This mystery, tied to the Judas cradle's invasive pain, solidifies its near-top rank in our brutal ranking, a horrifying relic in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The Scold's bridal features in a tale from 1597 in Fife, Scotland, during a wave of witch hunts. A woman named Agnes Muir, accused of cursing a neighbor's crops, was fitted with the bridle, its spiked tongue cutting her mouth as she was paraded through the village. The news from Scotland records her silence, forced by pain, but the next day, the bridle was found shattered, Agnes gone, and a single rose left on the ground. Was this a rescue by her kin, or a divine omen? Locals claimed the village square echoed with her voice, chanting softly at dusk. This mystery, tied to the Scold's bridal's humiliating pain, underscores its place in our brutal ranking, a cruel symbol in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The heretic's fork appears in a story from 1500 in Venice, during the Inquisition's grip. A merchant named Luca Bellini, accused of blasphemy, was strapped with the fork, its prongs piercing his chin and chest. Records note his struggle to stay upright, blood trickling as he refused to confess. But one night, the cell was empty, the fork bent, and a pearl left behind. Was this a bribe by his wealthy family, or a miracle? Locals claimed the dungeon hummed with whispers of Luca's prayers. This mystery, tied to the heretic's fork's precise agony, reinforces its rank in our brutal ranking, a grim note in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The thumbscrew's pain is captured in another tale, this one from 1560 in Colchester, England. A widow named Elizabeth Howe, accused of cursing crops, faced thumbscrews in a dungeon, her fingers crushed until she screamed. Court records note her defiance, refusing to name accomplices, but the dungeon was found empty, with a sprig of lavender left behind, its scent lingering. Was this a village rescue, defying the magistrates, or a divine sign of her innocence? Locals claimed the dungeon smelled of lavender, with faint cries at dusk. This mystery, tied to the thumbscrew's localized torment, secures its place in our brutal ranking, a small but cruel device in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The societal context of these medieval torture devices reveals their role in a world ruled by fear and faith. The church and state, through texts like the Constitutio Criminalis Carolina, 1532, codified torture as a legal tool to combat heresy, witchcraft, or rebellion. Devices like the breaking wheel or rack were public, designed to deter crime through spectacle, while dungeon tortures like the strappado or thumbscrew extracted confessions in secret. The Malleus Maleficarum framed pain as divine justice, targeting the body to save the soul. Yet its excesses hundreds tortured in Bamberg or Würzburg sparked resistance. Communities sometimes hid victims, as seen in the Pendle witch trials of 1612, turning torture into a spark for defiance. This tension between control and rebellion shapes the dark history of medieval torture devices, their pain a mirror of medieval Europe's deepest anxieties. The psychological impact of these devices was as brutal as their physical toll. The rack's slow stretch, the strappado's sudden drops, or the breaking wheel's methodical blows broke minds before bodies, with victims dreading each moment of pain. Public tortures, like the scold's bridle or Judas' cradle, humiliated victims before crowds, amplifying shame and fear. The Directorium Inquisitorum notes that anticipation waiting for the crank to turn or the point to pierce was a weapon, forcing confessions through terror. Yet some victims resisted, their silence or defiance, like Maria de la Cruz's refusal to name accomplices, inspiring legends of resilience. This psychological warfare places devices like the breaking wheel, rack, and Judas' cradle at the top of our brutal ranking, their terror a cornerstone of the dark history of medieval torture devices. The cultural impact of these devices shaped medieval Europe's art, literature, and folklore. Woodcuts depicted racked bodies, broken limbs, or impaled victims, their grim imagery a warning to the faithful. Ballads mourned the tortured, turning rebels or witches into tragic heroes. As seen in songs about Agnes Sampson or Joan of Arc, sermons used torture to preach against sin, while tales of haunted dungeons echoing with cries or glowing with ghostly light spread fear. The Decameron by Boccaccio and later Gothic works like The Pit and The Pendulum by Edgar Allan Poe drew on these images, cementing the cultural legacy of medieval torture devices. This legacy, woven into medieval Europe's collective memory, underscores their enduring horror in the dark history of torture. Let's explore another device, the Spanish donkey, a lesser-known but brutal tool, ranking high for its excruciating design. Picture a dungeon in Madrid, 1520, where an accused heretic is forced to straddle a sharp, wedge-shaped wooden beam, weights tied to their feet to press them downward. Inquisition records describe the Spanish donkey, used to punish heresy or sexual sins, its edge cutting into the groin, splitting flesh and causing unbearable pain. The victim's own weight intensified the agony, with interrogators adding weights to prolong suffering. The psychological toll being exposed and humiliated before interrogators was devastating, with the pain lingering for days, often leading to infection or death. Its public or semi-public use amplified its terror, making it a high-ranking device in our brutal ranking, a cruel relic in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The Spanish donkey features in a story from 1530 in Granada, Spain. A merchant named Diego Alvarez, accused of heresy, was tortured on the donkey, his screams echoing as the wedge cut deeper. Records note his refusal to confess, but the next morning, the device was empty, with a bloodied cloth and a single coin left behind. Was this a bribe by his family, or a divine sign? Locals claimed the dungeon echoed with moans, the scent of blood lingering. This mystery, tied to the Spanish donkey's agony, reinforces its high rank in our brutal ranking, a grim chapter in the dark history of medieval torture devices. Another device, the knee splitter, ranks high for its targeted destruction. Picture a dungeon in Augsburg, 1600, where an accused witch's knees are clamped in a vice-like device, its screws tightened to crush cartilage and bone. German trial records describe the knee splitter, used to disable victims, its screws piercing flesh with each turn. The pain was excruciating. Shattered knees left victims crippled, unable to walk, their suffering a warning. The psychological dread watching the screws tighten, knowing bones would break, was as brutal as the physical agony. Its use in witch hunts, particularly in Germany, places it high in our brutal ranking, a devastating tool in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The knee splitter appears in a tale from 1615 in Fulda, Germany. A teacher named Elizabeth Becker, accused of teaching witchcraft, faced the knee splitter, her screams filling the dungeon as her knees were crushed. Records note her silence on accomplices, but her cell was empty, with a child's slate inscribed with a cross left behind. Was this a rescue by her students, or a divine omen? Locals claimed the dungeon echoed with children's voices, a haunting reminder of Elizabeth's work. This mystery, tied to the knee splitter's cruelty, underscores its rank in our brutal ranking, a grim note in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The water torture, or taka, ranks high for its invisible but devastating pain. Picture a dungeon in Salamanca, 1490, where an accused which is bound to a slanted board, a cloth over her mouth as water is poured, simulating drowning. The Directorium Inquisitorum praises its bloodless method, ideal for repeated sessions. The panic of suffocation, combined with interrogators' demands, broke minds as much as bodies. Its use in the Spanish Inquisition and English trials places it high in our brutal ranking, a silent terror in the dark history of medieval torture devices. Water torture features in a story from 1600 in Toulouse, France. A midwife named Jeanne Dubois, accused of bewitching infants, was tortured with water, choking as it filled her lungs. Records note her defiance, but her cell was empty, with a feather on the floor. Was this a rescue or a miracle? Locals claimed the dungeon echoed with infant cries. This mystery, tied to water torture's terror, reinforces its rank in our brutal ranking, a chilling chapter in the dark history of medieval torture devices. The societal impact of these devices extended beyond the dungeon, reshaping communities. Witch trials and inquisitions, fueled by the Malleus Maleficarum, turned neighbors into accusers, fracturing trust. Public tortures like the breaking will deterred crime, while secret ones like the strappado extracted confessions. Yet resistance emerged, communities hid victims, as in Pendle, turning torture into defiance. This dynamic shapes the dark history of medieval torture devices, their pain a reflection of medieval Europe's fears and resilience. Let's reflect on our brutal ranking. The breaking will tops the list for its bone-shattering agony, followed by the rack's relentless stretch, the Judas cradle's invasive cruelty, the Spanish donkey's cutting pain, the knee splitter's destructive force, the strappado's dislocating torment, water torture's suffocating panic, the pear of anguish's intimate horror, the heretic's fork's precise agony, the scold's bridle's humiliating pain, the Iron Maiden's mythic terror, and the thumbscrew's localized cruelty. These devices reveal a world where pain was power, yet defiance endured, their mysteries empty dungeons, ghostly echoes testifying to their legacy. As we close, what do these medieval torture devices tell us? They show a society ruled by fear and faith, where cruelty was justice, yet courage flickered in the shadows. If this brutal ranking gripped you, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and share your thoughts below. What's the most chilling torture device you've heard of? Was this pain justice or cruelty unleashed? Check our next video on witch trials where fear fueled torment. Stay curious, stay brave, and let the dark history of medieval torture devices haunt your dreams.